Hey there, and welcome to the next video in this series that's introducing JavaScript and DOM manipulation. So far you've learned about the fundamentals of JavaScript and putting it in a script tag and running JavaScript and creating variables to store data and creating your own functions and getting into events and stuff. And honestly, it's a lot. I know that I'm throwing a lot at you during this week. And honestly, I think up until this point, I think you might be feeling like, what's the point of all of this? And my hope is that this video will introduce what's the point. This will answer that question. So in this video, we're going to talk about using JavaScript to make your web page interactive, which is kind of the whole point of JavaScript. So everything that you've learned so far is hopefully about to pay off, and you'll see why you are learning all about it. So just to get started, I have my handy, just my Scratch directory that I've been working from. It's just a pretty basic HTML file that just has some boilerplate in it. Nothing too exciting yet, but I'm going to build on this as we go. So let me kind of prepare that a little bit. I've got my code on the left and my rendered web page on the right here. So here's the code and here's the rendered HTML. Okay, so what I want to talk about first, I want to take a little detour into CSS. So my end goal is to talk about JavaScript, but to get there, I want to talk about CSS just for a second. So remember the style tag, and you can put it in your own CSS file, separate from your HTML file, but just to get something working, I'm going to use the style tag. So I have this P element down here, and I'm going to give it an ID of, I don't know, like greeting maybe. It could be whatever you want, but just remember that IDs exist. And so in this style tag, I can use the ID selector to, the ID selector to select that element and then style it. So I can say something like, give it a color of red, for example. And let me refresh, and there we go. So you've seen this this concept before of using CSS or using an ID attribute to give a certain element a particular ID, and then you've used CSS to style that specific element. So you've seen examples of referring to elements by their ID. So just keep that in mind. Just remember that because you're going to need that in a second. Just to get the JavaScript part of this started, I could use a script tag here. I'm debating, honestly. In the other examples, I've used the script tag, but I want to get in the habit of using code that's more similar to what you'll actually see. So I think maybe what I'll actually do, instead of putting my JavaScript in here, which is what I've done in previous videos, I think I'm going to do it the sort of more official way, the more realistic way that you'll see. So I'm going to say script source equals script.js, and then I am going to create a script.js file here. So I'm going to save this to that same directory, script.js. So now my directory has two files in it. Where'd my directory go? Here, it's just index.html and script.js. This is kind of the more realistic way of writing JavaScript, so I want to make sure that I show that rather than doing it one way in the videos and then asking you to do it a different way when you get to the project. So I have my script tag, and it's loading the source from script.js. So let me just get something working. I'm going to say, like, I'm going to have a function, maybe call it show alert, maybe show greeting, maybe something like that. This is all just example code, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. And in this function, what I'll do is I'll say, like, alert hello. It doesn't really matter. So let me refresh my HTML page, and nothing should change. Cool. Let me open up my JavaScript console just to check that I don't have errors. Cool. I don't. Great. So what I'll do is maybe I'll add an on-click attribute here, and in this on-click attribute, I will call my, what did I call it? I already forgot. Show greeting, my show greeting function. And this is kind of how I build up my HTML and JavaScript, kind of just one piece at a time. So I've got my p tag. Now my p tag has an onClick attribute. That onClick attribute we'll call showGreeting. ShowGreeting is over here in script.js, and it shows an alert, hello. Okay, so let's refresh and try that. So I'm going to click, and now I have my alert showing hello. Great. So that is, that's kind of a summary of what you've learned so far. You've seen some other stuff like creating variables and whatnot, but here are the fundamentals of getting all of the pieces connected. I have an element, it has an attribute, onClick attribute, and that is calling some JavaScript, which is in my script.js file. Great. So that sets us up for talking about the whole point of this video, which is interactive HTML, or a fancier word for that is DOM manipulation. So DOM is DOM. It's the document object model, and you don't really have to remember that term, but it's a common like search term if you want to look it up on your favorite search engine. But it's how the website is represented behind the scenes. So if you go to your elements tab, or if you go to like right click and inspect elements, same thing. This is maybe not a super complicated example, so it's not super interesting, but notice that the HTML is in this kind of hierarchical structure. In computer science terms, we would call this a tree, but you don't need to worry about that. It's a hierarchy. So we have HTML at the very top. We have an HTML tag. And then we have the head and body within that top level HTML tag. So it kind of splits into two. And then inside of the head tag, we have 1, 2, 3 other tags. And then inside of body, we have another tag. So it's this kind of like nested structure of HTML tags that creates the overall web page. And that is the DOM. And you can write JavaScript that accesses the DOM or changes the DOM, which is another way to say changes the page or accesses the page. So there are a few ways to kind of interact with the DOM or with the page in JavaScript, and the one I want to maybe start with is the getElementById function, the document.getElementById function. So what I'm going to do is maybe create a variable, call it like p_element or something, and I'm going to say equals document.getElementById. And in that function, I'm going to give it a parameter, and the parameter is the ID of the element that I want to get. So if I look at my HTML, the ID that I want to get is greeting. So this will give me this p tag in my JavaScript. And I'm going to get real annoyed by my code formatting, but that's okay. So now my code calls the document.getElementById function, passes it a parameter of greeting, and this function goes off and looks in the DOM, or looks in the page, for the element with that ID. And then I am creating a new variable called p_element and setting it equal to that value, which is going to be an element. And I haven't done anything with the element yet, but let me just maybe do something like this, p_element.innerText, and we'll talk about this in a second, equals you clicked the, or maybe I'll change it to hello world since that's what I was saying before, hello world. Okay, so notice in this code, I'm no longer calling the alert function. I am getting the p_element, and then I'm saying p_element.innerText equals hello world. And again, this showGreeting function is called in the onClick attribute of the p_element. So I'm going to refresh this. Okay, so I've got my hello world here, which is, wait a second, that's not going to work. Real quick, maybe I'll change this to goodbye world, whatever. Sorry, that's a little confusing. I was going to update it to be the same thing that starts as, that's real dumb. Anyway, so my p tag starts as hello world, right? And then in my onClick attribute, I call the showGreeting function. And when I call the showGreeting function, I get the element, and then I set its inner text to goodbye world. And I'm just going to click. And you see that now the inner text is goodbye world because I updated it in the JavaScript itself. And this is, at its core, DOM manipulation. You are changing the page or manipulating the page or manipulating the DOM. All of these words mean the same thing. You are manipulating the DOM from your JavaScript. And from here, it's, in quotation marks, just a matter of finding other functions and other kind of properties that let you interact with the DOM or with the page. So there's a couple things that I want to talk about. First of all, let me just point out that p_element.innerText, this innerText property or field, if you want to call it that, it's like, as its name suggests, it lets you set the inner text of the p element. So if I inspect this element, here's the p tag, here's the p element, and its inner text is what's inside of it. There's another kind of similar property called Innerhtml. I always miss up the uppercase, the casing of this variable, so we'll see if that's the right one. But it's the same kind of idea, but it lets you include HTML. So maybe I'll say that's a strong tag and make it kind of bold. So let me refresh. It's going to start out as hello world, and I'm going to click, and now it's goodbye world, and it's bolded. So Innerhtml lets you kind of set the inner, HTML of it. So it's goodbye, and then an HTML tag, and then an exclamation point. If I had done inner text here, we can just kind of demonstrate what that does real quick. See that, like, this is not treated as HTML, it's treated as text. And so you get this, the HTML like in the page itself, which may or may not be what you want, but they do kind of two different things. So next, I don't know, maybe I'll take a step back and say, like, as per usual, I don't expect you to memorize any of this. I don't expect you to memorize inner text or inner HTML or anything like that. Instead, what I would recommend is getting cozy with your favorite search engine and looking up, I don't know, like JavaScript, DOM functions. I didn't like prepare this ahead of time. But here you go. Here's W3 School's JavaScript DOM methods. And method is another word for function. So you can learn more about it, like exactly. Here's get element by ID, Innerhtml, which are some examples that we've already seen. And you can click through, and I guess it's like a tutorial style, so you can go next, 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 next. Is there a table of contents? Yeah. Where am I? Yeah, so here's some of the things you can do. You can mess with the document itself. You can get various elements and all that good stuff. I would focus on the get element by ID function first. I think that's the one you're going to use the most often, which gives you an element. And then once you have an element, then you can use its various fields. So I think that's probably what this page is going to tell you about. Maybe not. Okay, this is more about getting the elements again. But what I'll say is, like, once you have an element, then you can call various, you can use various fields and variables and whatnot on the element itself. So it's like p_element.innerText. You don't have to worry too much about that. Just know that the syntax is the variable name and then a dot and then the field you want to use. And let me try to find a better like search query for you. So like maybe like JavaScript element functions, maybe. Yeah, I think this guy, maybe. Yeah, here we go. So here's a bunch of other fields you can mess with. So like inner text is in here. Yeah, inner text and inner HTML are in here. So there are some other ones that are interesting. I'm going to specifically call out style, if I can find it, QRST. So here's style. So one thing we could do is, let me go back to my JavaScript here. So instead of setting inner text, or maybe in addition to it, I'll say p_element dot, let me get my capitalization right, p_element dot style. And style is a little goofy because it's kind of a nested field, but what I want to do is dot style dot something else. So in this case, I don't know what I'll change is maybe I'll just change the color to green. Okay, so I've saved that, and now in my show greeting function, I'm doing three things. I'm first calling the document.getElementById function to get the element with the greeting, which is what we've done already. I'm calling inner text, or I'm setting the inner text to change the text of the element itself. And let me kind of get rid of this extra HTML tag while I'm here. And then I'm going to set the style, and I'm going to specifically set the color of the style on that P element to green. So let me go open up my browser, refresh. So it starts out as red, hello world, and I'm going to click. And now it's green, goodbye world, because I have changed both its inner text and its style to green. So these are just various examples of the kinds of things you can do when you have an element, but I'm not going to sit here and list all of them. I think in a previous video I spent probably too much time explaining like a bunch of flex and grid properties. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to say you can search for them. If you look for JavaScript element functions or JavaScript element properties is maybe another way to search for it, you'll find a lot more resources. So here's like the MDN page for it, and you'll have lots of options to play with. But the ones that we looked at so far are probably going to get you pretty far. So document.get element by ID, and then inner text and style. Those are probably what you're most likely looking for. Cool. So that's manipulating the DOM. And the last thing I want to talk about is getting input. And this isn't necessarily a new concept, but it's a new application of the concepts that you just learned about. So let me think about how I want to do this. First, let's change my HTML a little bit. So I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm going to get rid of my styling now. So I'm just kind of starting over. So now I have this blank empty page, and I can refresh just to double check. Sure, fine. So to start with, what I'm going to do is introduce you to an HTML tag that might be new to you if you haven't seen it before, might not be new to you if you've looked around on MDN or W3 schools. But long story short, that HTML tag is the input tag. So I'm going to say input, and I'm going to give it an ID because I'm going to reference it by ID, and I'm going to say it's, I don't know, let's say like username or something. I haven't really planned it out, but that's good enough. And it's a self-closing tag, which kind of always throws me off, but that just means that instead of having this kind of style HTML tag with a closing tag, you don't have that. You instead just have a slash like inside of the same tag. It's kind of similar to like the image tag, if you've seen that before. Anyway, so this creates an input text box, and let me just double check that that's actually true. Refresh, and here we go. We have an input that I can type into, and whoops, there you can see my email address. It doesn't matter, but you can type whatever you want into this box. And right now it doesn't do anything because we haven't set up any other HTML elements or any JavaScript that does anything with them, but we can change that in a second. So let me maybe make a button, which again, if you haven't seen that before, it's an HTML tag that creates a button, kind of self-explanatory, hopefully. And let me just say, create some text in it. I'm going to say hi for now. And again, the button doesn't actually do anything. I can click it, but it doesn't do anything. So let me have an on-click attribute, and I'm going to set that equal to a function that I haven't actually written yet. Actually, let me just use this show greeting function. You can call it anything you want, but I'm going to call it show. Whoops. I'm going to call it show greeting. Okay. So I have my input element and my button and my show greeting function, which will be called when I click the button. And to prove that that is true, maybe I'll add a console.log function here and say, I don't know, clicked. Fine. So I'm just going to test that. And again, like this habit of just changing like one thing and then testing it is really important, and I really recommend getting into that habit. So I'm going to check my JavaScript console when I click this button, and hi, and there it is. It says clicked. So I know that the pieces are connected. My index.html file is doing its thing. My onClick attribute is doing its thing, and the show greeting function is doing its thing. So next, what I want to do is use the handy dandy document.getElementById function, getElementById, and what I want to do is give that the ID that I set on my input on my input element. So I'm going to take username and I'm going to get the element by ID username. And I'm going to create a variable. You can call it anything you want. Input equals document.get element by ID username. So I am calling the document.get element by ID function with the parameter username. That's going to return to me the element that has that ID, which in our case is this element or this element. And then I'm storing that value, which is an element, in the input variable. Okay, so now I can mess with it, and I could also set things like, you know, the style and then whatnot. But what I want to do instead is get the value from the input, and the way I can do that is say let username create a variable, set it equal to the input.value field. So this is a variable which is going to hold the value that the user types. And then I'm going to set this variable equal to that. I could probably just use this directly, but whatever. I'm going to store it in this variable kind of separately just so I can work with it. And then the last thing I want to do is, you know, maybe I'll start out by saying like alert, just because I forgot to add a p tag, honestly. But what I'll say is hello, and then plus username, just to get something working. Okay, I'm going to refresh. And I'm going to enter my name here. My name is Kevin. I really should probably delete that autocomplete, whatever. That's just Chrome doing its thing. That's just something I've entered previously. Maybe I should specify that that's not something that I did here in the HTML. That was just popping up because in a previous text box I had entered my email address, but that's nothing special. So here, I got rid of it. So I've typed my name into the input, and now I'm going to click hi. And you'll see hello Kevin, because I am getting my name from the input's value, which is whatever I typed, and then I'm showing an alert that says hello whatever I typed. So if I type, I don't know, Ada here, we'll get hello Ada. If I type, you know, whatever else, you'll get whatever you typed here. And so that's how you can get input from the user. And you can combine all of this together into kind of getting input from the user and then changing something in the page as a result. So I'll add a p tag down here, and I'll give it an ID of like output or something. And I'll just have it empty to start with. And so I'm going to refresh, nothing has changed. I'm just like checking that nothing is broken too horribly. I just have an empty p tag down there now. And so what I can do is I'll say let output equals document.get element by ID. And what did I call it? I think I called it output. I already forgot. I always forget what I type in one file, so I always have to check. So all right, output. Yep, output. So now I have the p element, which is empty by default. And what I can do is I'll just change this line of code to output.innerText equals, and then I'll set it to what I was previously passing in as a parameter to the alert function. So to summarize, or to kind of just read through this line by line, which is something that you should absolutely get into the habit of doing as you're writing JavaScript, just read it line by line over and over again until you really understand exactly what it's doing. Like I do that all day, every day with every piece of code I write. So we create an input element, which is the element returned from document.get element by ID for username, which is this guy. And then I create a new variable called username, which I set equal to this. Honestly, I probably didn't need this step, but whatever. I created a variable and I set it equal to this. Then I call the document.get element by ID function again, this time with output, which is going to give me that empty p tag. I store that in this variable called output. And then I set the output.innerText field to hello plus username, which is what I got from the text input. So I'm going to refresh one more time. I'm going to type my name and I'm going to click hi. And I hope that my message shows up here. So that is how you can kind of combine everything that you've learned to start making your page interactive. We have defined our own function. We are using variables. We are using event callbacks, and we are using sort of DOM functions and DOM fields to get the value from the page and then do something with it and change the page as a result. And this is a super, super, super common pattern in web development. It's how most of the modern web works, where you'll get input from a user, do something with it, and then change the page as a result. So I've shown like a relatively short example, but this concept is very powerful, and it's one that you'll return to over and over and over again as you learn web development. So it's worth being familiar with and worth practicing. Okay, so that was interactive HTML or DOM manipulation, or changing the web page, however you want to call it. That's kind of the culmination of everything that I would recommend learning this week as you get into the fundamentals of JavaScript. So that's where I'm going to end this video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching all of the videos and sticking with it. As always, let me know what questions you have and whatnot, but I'm going to end it there. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.